upside downness, if that's a word, in all of the upside downness of the world these days, it certainly feels very nice and very, very grounding to be able to learn together, to have some kind of consistent Torah study. I feel like is maybe one of the things, one of the proactive things that we can do to sort of give ourselves a sense of being anchored, and not completely having the rug pulled out from underneath us. So I'm grateful to you for coming and for sharing your Monday morning with me, which gave me the motivation to sit myself down and prepare what ended up being something much more complicated than what I anticipated. But I was really very grateful to have happened upon the parak of Tehilim that I happened upon. So I'm going to sort of give you a little background as to how I got to what we are about to learn today. A while ago, I was listening to a shiur, and became, sometimes you just hear something and it sort of sticks with you. So I heard a shiur on one of the psukim from Tehilim Parak Samachet. The pasuk which we will study together later today is pasuk Chaf, Baruch Hashem Yom Yom Yamos Lanu Ha'el Yeshuatenu Sala. A specific pasuk in this parak, and I was so moved and inspired by the meaning of this pasuk, which again we'll talk about together, which is basically a call to us to focus on the day to day and not get caught up in what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day or the next week or the next month, which we will talk about. And it sort of drew me into this parak of Tehilim that I didn't know so much about. Well, I soon discovered why I don't know so much about Tehilim Samachet, Tehilim 68. And that is because it is by far the most complicated, most difficult, most challenging to understand parak of Tehilim that I personally have ever come across. And I felt very validated when I found one shiur online that discussed this in like the hundreds and perhaps thousands of Tehilim shiurim that are available online. There was literally one that I found on parak Samachet. And then I saw the words of Amos Chacham. Amos Chacham was a Tanakh scholar in Israel, and he was one of the many contributors and editors of the Dat Mikra, like the Jerusalem Talmud, I think it's often called, the Jerusalem Bible. So Dat Mikra is like a more modern day Israeli commentary on many of the books in Tanakh. So in the Tehilim volume, Amos Chacham says that Parak Samachet is the most satum. It's the most closed. It's the most difficult to understand parak of Tehilim, he thinks, of all 150. So that was a little validating. And he points out that there are a couple of reasons for that. One reason is that there are words and phrases that are used in this parak of Tehilim that don't appear anywhere else in Tanakh. And it's not just one or two, there are many. So that already leaves you a little bit lacking, because we're used to having the ability to look at where words or phrases appear in other places of Tanakh. That's actually one of the ways that I really enjoy learning, because it allows you to learn from the lessons and the context from other places. But with many of the words and phrases in Samachet, you're on your own. They don't appear anywhere else. So you're a little bit, it's sort of like it's an island. There's nowhere else to connect some of these words and phrases. The other thing that makes Samachet so challenging is that when you read each pasuk by pasuk, you really need to be somewhat of a private investigator to try to figure out how each pasuk is linked to the one that comes after it. It is certainly not a like flow of consciousness. It's certainly not like, it almost seems like free association. I hope, by the way, that we'll read it today together and we'll study it together. We'll see that there is a method to what seems like a little bit of madness. It's obviously not. It was written by the greatest composer of all time. But just those things, I think, really contribute to the vault that is Parak Samachet. It is just a bit of a locked vault. So I was a little overwhelmed, and my husband kept saying to me, why are you banging your head against the wall? Why don't you just pick something else? But I had I don't know if this happens to some of you, I had fallen down a rabbit hole and I couldn't pull myself back up. Usually that happens to me on like Instagram or Facebook where I fall in, but this time it happens with the parak of Tehilim. So I figured could be worse. So what I would like for us to do today is to study this parak together, to try and pull out what I think is one of the main themes. I'm sure there are many others, but one theme that I found particularly meaningful. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention two things. One is that some of you may be aware that yesterday was the burial and funeral for a most beloved, I don't even know how to describe him, man, Jewish leader, Torah scholar, Rabbi Yehuda Kalamer, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, who was the rabbi of the Young Israel of West Hempstead for, I believe, almost 40 years, who was a giant of a man in literally every sense of the word, except that he was also the most humble person you will have ever met. As a family, as a community, as individuals, as a people, we are in a state of such despair. We are so sad to have lost him. It is a tremendous, tremendous loss. And I think this probably happens to other people as well, that when you're experiencing something, when you're in the midst of a certain situation in your life, or you're experiencing certain emotions, it tends to color the way that you view or see everything else. So with the funeral being very, the loss of Rabbi Kalamer, and the funeral being a very significant presence and experience for many of us yesterday, hours and hours of watching people give their eulogies for him, and being online with many thousands of people who were watching the funeral. It was just amazing to watch the numbers go up and up, many, many thousands of people who were watching this funeral. And I think the thing that stands out the most, and it's hard to pick one thing, but the thing that stands out the most about Rabbi Kalamer is that he arguably was one of the Gedolim, if not the Gadol of our generation. And most people have never heard of him. If you didn't have the gift, if you didn't have the blessing of being connected to the West Hempstead community, or you weren't a member of the community, or somehow tangentially related, you could never have heard of Rabbi Yehuda Kalamer. And I think that for me, is what makes him just the most compelling person that I now feel so grateful and so privileged to have known. I wish I could have spent more time with him. I wish I could have learned more from him. But I think that that his being, his essence, his presence in my life and the life of so many thousands of other people is weighed very heavily. It influenced very much the way that I read Tehilim Samachet. And I think for those of you who knew him, or for those of you who might have had the opportunity to read about him, it will be everywhere on social media if you're looking. And I pray and hope that his family and the community will find a way to sort of share his greatness with the world. He never would have wanted it to happen in his lifetime, but now that we don't have him anymore, I think we have an obligation to sort of perpetuate his unique legacy. So that is certainly a part of my study of Samachet and our learning of it today. And then finally, I just want to mention that today is also the 27th of Tevet. Also is the Yoetzet of Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. And Rav Hirsch, I just happened upon that fact last night. Sivan Rahav Meir posted it. And it is something that sort of jarred me, because I can't learn a parak of Tehilim without Rav Hirsch. And so I was feeling just very grateful that we will have an opportunity to study Tehilim. We will, excuse me one second. Sorry about that. You know, the joys of Zoom and quarantine. So it is really a privilege to be able, we will of course be quoting Rav Hirsch, because can't learn Tehilim without Rav Hirsch. And as I see someone posted in the chat, that it is also the Yoetzet of her mother. So God willing, our learning today should be an aliyah for the neshamas of all of those whom we are missing so much. Okay, so there are two main schools of thought in the understanding of Parak Samachet. There is the, I would say, most pshat level understanding, the most basic level of understanding, which is that this is a story, and I'm actually going to share my screen with all of you so that you can see what I'm talking about. Here we go. That this parak of Tehilim, if you read it through, and like I said, it's not so simple to just read it through, not in Hebrew, not in English, not in any other language. But if you were to read it through, you would definitely get the theme that there was some kind of battle, some kind of war, and then there was a great big victory. Hashem sort of, swooped in and saved the Jewish people, saved David HaMelech. And then it looks like by the end, there's some kind of celebration, almost like a victory parade that's taking place. And you can certainly read this parak of Tehilim with all of that in mind, and it will fit very nicely into that, into that framework. But there is another way of reading this parak of Tehilim, one that is proposed primarily by Chazal, but is supported very much by the Targum, and like I mentioned before, by Chazal, so it's often quoted by Rashi, which is understanding this parak of Tehilim as throughout it, referencing and connecting to other times in Jewish history. So whereas on the Pshat level, we're looking at it from the perspective of King David, during the time of King David, following one of the many and fierce battles that he fought. In particular, you'll notice, we won't be able to go through it in such detail, but you'll notice if you read through it, that this war that if you look at it this way, that he's describing must have taken place in the north. Bashan, probably like Golan Heights area, you'll see references to snow and large mountains, things that really sort of invoke our sense of the north of Israel today. And we know certainly of its strategic importance, so it fits very well. So that's one approach. And then again, the second approach of Chazal, which is throughout this chapter, to be making connections between the certain psukim, certain phrases in Perek Samachet, and using them as the source or linking them to different events in Jewish history. And what's so fascinating is so many of the midrashim that we are the most familiar with. When I say we are the most familiar with, I maybe mean like since the time that either we are children or our grandchildren, all those midrashim about Har Sinai and being the little mountain versus the big mountain, or the angels not wanting to share the Torah with the Jewish people. The sources for so many of these midrashim are actually Tehilim Samachet. The Talmud quotes it very often as the source for so many of these stories. So there are two, I guess I would say, main ways of looking at it. We will sort of go back and forth between the two. They're both very compelling, but I think if we have the focus of looking for one particular theme, you can kind of explain it using both approaches. And that's what I would like to do today, is to sort of go back and forth between the two approaches. Much of what I'm going to say today, so I should say some of what I'm going to say today, I heard from Rabbi Tzvi Ram, who is a rabbi in New York, and I'll try to remember to quote all the other sources and commentaries as we go through. At the very beginning, the first 5 psukim here, which since it's in front of you, I'm not going to read it. I think you can sort of follow along with your eyes. I'm going to sort of summarize and then focus on certain psukim so that we could try to cover the whole parak today. The first 5 psukim here talk about Hashem driving away the enemies of the Jewish people. And it talks about them being destroyed and melting like wax and being driven away and dispersed. There is a real description of the power, the strength of Hashem. He is described as Solu, where is it here? Solu la rochev ba'aravot, right? That we should praise the one who is riding the chariot. Aravot refers to the heavens. So it's describing Hashem as like this massive warrior. And who could imagine anything more impressive, almost more terrifying than the idea of a God who is riding a chariot in the highest, most powerful levels of heaven. So we're getting this like overwhelming, awe-inspiring description of Hashem. Very much this, almost a fear of this impression of fear that we have. And then David HaMelech, as he often does, and we have seen him do in the classes we've had so far, he switches gears. We've said before, he goes from up here to down here. So I think what we see in this parak of Tehilim is him going from big to small. We've seen him go from, very happy to very sad. I think what we see in this parak of Tehilim is him going from great to small. The first place that we're going to see this is in Psukim Vav and Zayin. And this is going to be, for us, our first example of this theme that I think becomes evident in Perek Samachet, which is, as great as Hashem is, that is how humble he wants us to be. And it is in contrast to his greatness, where we will sometimes see him behaving with humility, where we will sometimes learn from him in his modeling of humility. But what really becomes clear is the expectation, the encouragement, really, that we will conduct ourselves with humility, with the midah of anava, of viewing ourselves in the proper framework, which is not to say that we don't have confidence, which is not to say that we don't believe in ourselves, but it's to understand sort of our place in the universe and what our job is while we are here. So our first example, after describing Hashem, after David HaMelech describes Hashem as this great warrior who rides a chariot in the heavens, he then describes him as Va'avi Yatomim V'dayan Almanot Elokim B'ma'on Kacho. Hashem is the father of orphans, right? This is such a beautiful phrase, a such beautiful way of expressing this idea that those that don't have a father, Hashem becomes their father. V'dayan almanot. He is the advocate, the defendant of the widows. Where is Hashem doing all of this from? Where is he relating to these individuals from? B'ma'on kacho, from his dwelling place, which we always envision is very, very high up, all the way from up there, from his great chariot that he's riding through heavens, from his resting place, which we know is, how many light years above where we exist. From all the way up there, Hashem conducts himself as the father of those who have no fathers, and obviously applies to mothers as well. In Halacha, anyone who loses one parent is considered an orphan. Right? I think in general, we think of, a child goes to an orphanage, God forbid. Orphan Annie had no parents. But in sort of our halachic terminology, we view anybody who's lost a parent as a yasom, as an orphan. And so Hashem, David HaMelech describes him in this most intimate, parental, caring, kind way, that even though he is this great warrior in the heavens, he's also down here with the children and with the adults, with anybody who has lost a parent. He functions like their parents. And he is also I would change the translation here, not the judge of widows, but the advocate, right? The dayan, in the sense that he becomes, as Rav Hirsch explains, the root of the word almana is Elaim, Aleph Lamed Mem. Elaim is somebody who can't speak. And Elaim is somebody without a voice. And Rav Hirsch suggests that an almana, when she loses her spouse, when she loses her husband, so she loses her ability to articulate, to express in certain aspects of the world. Now, we know that the place of women today is very different than it was in the times of David HaMelech and the times of the Gemara, etc., where today a woman can own property and she can have a job and a bank account and she can care for herself. Certainly in these times, and even certainly in those times, and even today, where we have this sense that for many women, the loss of their spouse leaves them feeling like they can't articulate, they can't express, they don't have the voice that they used to have. So says Rav Hirsch, that's what Hashem is. He's their dayan, he's their advocate. And it fits so beautifully with that phrase of Elaim, of not having a voice, that here Hashem is functioning as that voice. He will not allow anyone to take advantage, not of the orphan and not of the widow. He is there for them in the most intimate of ways. Rav Hirsch actually uses this most beautiful language to describe. He says, here Hashem has this unrelatable, unattainable greatness. He is larger than life, and yet he is still the closest friend to man on earth. I thought that was such a beautiful way of describing the contrast of Hashem and all of his greatness and his ability to relate to the individual and really to the vulnerable. Pasuk Zayin. Who else is Hashem advocating for? Who else is he taking care of? Elokim Moshiv Yechidim Baita. He is the one who helps the Yechidim, those that are alone. He gives them a home. He settles them into their home. Again, we are, I think, hopefully all so much more attuned to this now, given the fact that so many more people are alone or are feeling alone than we have probably ever had before. Even with all of our technology and even with all of our ability to connect, there is still a tremendous feeling of loneliness and of aloneness, whether a person is technically, physically alone or not. And here, David HaMelech is telling us that with all of his greatness, he is Moshiv Yechidim Baita. He is taking the time to settle the individual in their home, to make them feel comfortable, to make them feel like they're not alone, that he's sort of keeping company with those people who feel alone. Such a sense of comfort that Hashem doesn't want anyone to feel this way. So here he is settling himself in with the individual who's feeling alone. And then finally, motzi asirim bakosharot, that he takes the prisoners. The language, the way that it translates here, asirim certainly are people who are bound, people who are constricted. So it could be prisoners, but it could be really anyone who is feeling like their hands are tied, right? So he takes those people that are feeling like they are stuck, and he motzi, he pulls them out. So I noticed, I think it was also from Rav Hirsch, that it doesn't say he frees them. He doesn't unlock the handcuffs. What it says is motzi, he pulls them out by their hands. The kosharot literally means with their, I know it says here at an opportune time, which it could mean that, but the way Rav Hirsch understands it is he relates this kosher to kosher with a kuf, that they've been knotted, right? They've been locked in. And the image that Rav Hirsch creates is that very often when a person feels stuck, they can't see their way out of it. So you can unstuck them, but they're not going to go anywhere because they're paralyzed. They feel so stuck in their place that even if you give them the key, or even if you unlock the handcuffs or unlock the jail cell, they're not going anywhere because they are so terrified of what is out there. I don't know, this sounds a little bit like how I feel the first time I venture out after I've been in quarantine, right? That there is just this sense of, I can't go back out there. And here the description is so magnificent that Hashem doesn't just release you. He takes you by the hands and he's motzi. He pulls you out. He shows you that it's going to be okay. He doesn't just free you and let you go because he knows you're stuck. You need that additional type of support. And what I think we see here are examples of David HaMelech explaining that Hashem is there for the most vulnerable. We know in general that the way that we judge a society, I would argue, the way that we judge individuals is how do those people treat the most vulnerable members of our society, right? Certainly we know from a cultural perspective, when we look back at a generation of people, when we study civilizations, one of the ways that we sort of pass judgment on their morality is, well, how did they treat the people who didn't have, right? How did they treat the people who couldn't advocate for themselves? And this is David HaMelech's way of telling us that this is the standard by which Hashem conducts himself. And therefore, we can assume that this is the standard that he expects of us. So that there is an expectation, there is a hope that we will conduct ourselves in all of our interactions, whether with people who are missing loved ones, right? Whether it's people who are feeling stuck, people who are feeling alone, whether it's actually people who are single and would like to not be single, people who would like to be married. I actually saw from the Torah Temima, I wasn't going to share this, but I found it very moving. This word bakosharot, the Torah Temima, Rabbi Halevi Epstein explains, don't read it bikosharot, read it bechi vishirot. Read it that when Hashem pulls a person out of their place where they're feeling so stuck, whether that person is a single person who would prefer to be married, or a person who is married who still feels alone, or whatever situation, whatever stuck situation a person finds themselves in, that Hashem comes and he guides you out, bechi v'shirot, with tears, but also with song. This acknowledgement, and I think this is what so many of us need, and I think what we probably intuit other people need as well, which is not to pretend like everything is fine. It's not just shirot. It's not just, yay, we're free, it's over. But with a sense of bechi, with a sense of acknowledging that this was really hard. This is really hard. We're going through a really tough time. And also we have what to be grateful for. There is bechi and there is also shirot. I thought that was a beautiful idea from the Torah Temima. So that's really our first example where we see that great, big, intimidating, awe-inspiring God is lowering himself to the point that all the way from on high, he makes himself busy in the daily lives of these vulnerable members of our society, of our community. And so clearly the message is, if Hashem, who is so busy, like legitimately busy, can find it in time in his busy schedule to invest himself in the daily lives of these people, can't we do the same thing? It's an expectation that we will follow. We will see the model that Hashem has shown us, and we also will interact with people in this way. We will find it within our very busy schedules to make sure to check in with people, to treat them with respect, to make sure they know they're not alone, and to follow Hashem's example in this way. So I think that is the first example, the first place where we see this idea of humility. And again, it's in contrast or sort of as a complement to the fact that Hashem is so big and so powerful. The next few psukim also describe Hashem marching and the earth is quaking and the heavens are dripping and there's noise and there's rain. And again, there's a show of power, a show of strength. And then we see in Pasuk Yud Aleph what I think is the second example of this idea of sort of, this is really connected to that last idea. Sorry, this idea of Chayatcha Yashvuva, Tachim B'tovatcha La'ani. Hashem, you're also busy with the poor people. You're also busy with the people who are lacking, the people who need. This was really connected to the previous idea. So let's go on now to the second idea. Pasuk Yud Gimel, Psukim Yud Gimel and Yud Daled. Here's our second example, where I think we will see another sort of another charge to be humble. Tzvaot Yidodun. The kings of hosts, we're going to translate this to refer to the kings of the other nations, right? Powerful, strong, those who lead the armies, Yidodun. They're going to wander and wander and wander. They're not going to be so successful. But you know who's going to divide the spoils? You know who's going to get the benefit of all of the wars that the people out there, the big strong generals have been fighting? The Nevat Bait. Nevat Bait Techalek Shalal. She who lives in the home, she who lives in the house, she's going to be the one who will divide the spoils. Now, who is this talking about? This is most likely talking about the Jewish people. The Jewish people, who is always referred to in the feminine, that she who lives in the home, she's going to be the one to divide the spoils. So you may think you're the big general with all of the, the trappings and the uniform and all the pins and all of the medals of honor. So you think you're going to be the one who has been so victorious, and so you're going to benefit from the war. But really, David HaMelech is telling us, and it's interesting because he himself was a warrior, but who does he say is really going to be the one that that benefits, the one that will divide the spoils? It's going to be the Jewish people as a whole. And what about them makes them so worthwhile? If they weren't on the field, if they weren't fighting, why would they get to divide the spoils? This may be referring to the idea of the bait in Jewish thought. The idea that the Jewish people we are told very often, we call ourselves the people of the book, right? We're really also the people of the home, the people of the family. Yes, we're the education people, we're the Torah learning people, no question. The Bayit could refer to the Beit Knesset and the Beit Midrash and the Beit HaSefer, all of those things that we know are very strong Jewish values. But at the core of everything that is Judaism, it's the Jewish home, it's the Jewish family. Some of you may be familiar with Dr. Ken Spiro. He is I can't remember all of his credentials, I apologize. You can look him up online. He's written a number of books. He is a teacher for Eish HaTorah, but I believe his background is that he was an academic for many years, and he was a professor of history, if I'm not mistaken. You can double check me. He gives a seminar where he tries to explain, or I should say he explains, the reason why the Jewish people are still around. Why is it that every other civilization seems to have disappeared? And he offers an explanation for why all the big ones have disappeared. He is able to pinpoint the same idea in all of the other civilizations and where the Jewish people have distinguished themselves. And to sum up a lot of hours of classes and a lot of pages in his books, his suggestion, his theory is that it's the focus on the Jewish home. It's the focus on family that is what allowed the Jewish people's legacy to perpetuate itself. Obviously, we have the context of this coming from Hashem saying, you'll be as numerous as the stars, etc. But we know our numbers are not so impressive. It's just that we don't stop, right? We're infinite in the sense that generation, thank God, after generation, that we continue to be here. Everybody else seems to have fallen off and we're still here. And Dr. Spiro credits the centrality of the Jewish home to the fact that the Jewish people are still here. And I think this is one of the things that's expressed in this idea of the Nevat Bait, meaning the people, the nation that dwells in the home, that focuses on the home, that knows that what goes on in the home is really what's going to win the war. You'll hear this a lot, right? Like there's a war on ideas. The war on ideas is maybe it's being fought out there, but it's really being fought in here. It's being fought in our homes. It's being fought on our phones, on our computer screens. It's being fought around the dinner table where we are hopefully having these conversations and talking about these ideas. We very much believe, and I think we're really living in a time where we see the influence like this. A lot can go on inside a home. These days there are opportunities, I guess, for us to see into each other's homes in ways that we didn't used to be able to do, right? So there is, I guess, a little less privacy, a little less intimacy, for better or for worse. The idea that what goes on in my house, like what we had for dinner last night, might be information that you all need to know about. So I may have posted it on social media. I didn't, because I don't typically post those kinds of things, but that may have been information that you all could have found out about me. Whereas obviously in generations past, that wasn't the case. I think that the message here is that it is not the strongest armies that are going to win the day. It's the strongest families. It's the strongest homes that are going to win the day. And I would say, I think this is a bit of chizuk, a bit of strength, a bit of encouragement to those of us who maybe look out there and think, wow, all those people, they're accomplishing so many things out there. They're writing books and they're interacting with world leaders, or they're really making a difference. They're an influencer, right? They're somebody who's really shaking up, the way the world is. They're really making their mark. Right? They're the Malkei Tzvaot. They're the kings of hosts. They've got thousands and thousands of followers, and I don't have so many followers, right? I think there's a message here for us, which is that at the end of the day, what really matters, those that will divide the spoils, those that will be the victors, are the ones who focus on what's going on right here, right now, in our very own homes, the Nevat Bait. Following this idea, David HaMelech also says, Im tishkevun ben shifatayim, kanfei yona nechpa bakesef, ve'evrotea birak rak charut. This is a really difficult pasuk to understand. I'm just going to sort of focus on the first piece. The first piece, if you lie between the borders, as it's translated here, the Radak actually translates the phrase shifatayim as referring to the pots and pans. And this fits in, of course, beautifully with the idea of an army, and that where is the least glamorous place for a soldier to be, right? You get called up to serve. The last thing you want is kitchen duty. It's so embarrassing to tell your family that you're peeling potatoes, right? You want to be on the front lines, or you want to be in intelligence, right? You want to be in one of those elite units. You don't want to be the one in the kitchen. So says the Radak, if you lay down between the pots, the rows, the borders here refers to, like, according to the Radak, rows of pots and pans. If you put yourself where all the soot is and all the dirt and all the potato scraps and potato peels, if that's where you spend your time, so then you will be, as it describes here, the feathers of a dove covered with silver and its pinions with brilliant gold. You will end up being the most celebrated, the most decorated. Again, this idea that the person who is focused on what's going on in the background, right? The person who's making sure that the soldiers are fed is actually the one that is going to be decorated and celebrated, because even though he's not getting the Medal of Honor for his bravery on the field, but he humbled himself and he kept himself devoted and dedicated to his role of supporting others, of feeding others, of being there for others. And that is someone that is eventually going to be celebrated with the greatest of honor, the greatest of silver and gold. I heard from Rifki Ram, who I mentioned before. I listened to his shir on Parak Samachat. I don't recall the source that he gave, but he explains that this applies to the study of Torah. Specifically, and this is our second example, so sort of humility that Hashem is asking of us, is requiring of us, that in order for a person to really study Torah and for it to really influence them, and for them to become a Torah scholar, a Talmid Chacham, it is required that they humble themselves. It is required that they lower themselves, that they are shochev ben shvatayim, that they don't only give classes and they don't only study Torah with the elite, right? That they are concerned, they are interested in the nitty gritty halachic details of the regular person's life, of the average situation, not just the stuff that gets published in a sefer or gets posted on, YU Torah or one of these, websites that has done such a beautiful job of sharing Torah, but the person who really is going to have the highest honor, silver and gold, is going to be that Torah scholar who is much more focused on what's going on down here and not on what's going on up here and out there. This sort of call to be humble, to lower oneself, to open oneself up, seems to be this sort of second example of humility that David HaMelech is suggesting we should have. So far we have a humility in the way that we interact with people who need our help, people who are vulnerable, people who are feeling alone. And now again, we have this sort of charge for humility of focusing on what goes on behind the scenes, not needing to be receiving the Medal of Honor, not needing to be at the front of the parade, leading all of the troops, but to be satisfied to be the person who was peeling the potatoes for the Friday night dinner, to be the person who was focused on what goes on in the background in the family, that those people are really going to reap tremendous rewards, right? Don't be discouraged. Don't think that just because you didn't end up on the cover of the newspaper or the cover of the magazine, you didn't get thousands and thousands of likes on your post, that doesn't mean that the reward isn't yours. The real reward, David HaMelech says, is actually yours. Here's the third example. Psukim Tet Zayin and Yud Zayin. Again, we're going to see, actually, I'll scroll back a little bit. Again, we see descriptions of Hashem. Here it talks about the snow. Fits very well with the idea of a war taking place up north, is that when Hashem helped the Jewish people defeat their enemy, he then blanketed the whole area in snow so that the enemy was sort of unable to maneuver themselves. Fits very nicely, and of course fits with our knowledge of what goes on in the Charmon and other parts up north in Israel. And then there are descriptions of more of the mountains up north. Har Elokim Har Bashan, Har Gavnunim Har Bashan. Okay, there's this great mountain, and I'd like to understand this phrase of Har Elohim not as the mountain of God, but a great mountain. A great mountain, because Elohim can mean greatness or largesse. So this great mountain, the mountain of Bashan, this mountain up north, Har Gavnunim, from the language of Gav, like from the back, that it has a great back, also massive, massive mountain. Also, the mountain of Bashan is huge, it's enormous. Lama tiratz dun harim gavnunim. Right? And then David HaMelech is, so to speak, calling out to these mountains, calling out to these great mountains with the big backs. Lama tiratz dun. So here they translate it as, why do you lurk? The Radak translates this word of tiratz dun, lama tirak dun. Why are you dancing? Why are you dancing so much? Why are you trying to draw attention to yourself? You large mountains, you already take up so much space. You already get so much attention. Why are you trying to draw more attention to yourselves? And this, of course, harkens back to that famous midrash of all of the mountains trying to get Hashem to give the Torah on them. And then there's cute little Har Sinai that is so humble and doesn't think it deserves it. And of course, that's the mountain that Hashem wants. So this really actually connects to both the Pshat level understanding as well as Chazal's understanding of these psukim, which is that here you have these mountains that are massive. They have their Har Gavnunim, they have these big backs, they're Har Elohim, they're huge. Why are you making a scene? Why are you dancing like that? Don't you know Hahar Chamad Elokim L'Shifto? Hashem has already chosen Hahar, the mountain that he wants to dwell on. Af Hashem Yishkon LaNetzach, right? Hashem will certainly, he will dwell there forever. You know where he's going to dwell? Not on the big mountain. And it doesn't matter what kind of song and dance you do. It doesn't matter how you project yourself or how you shine the spotlight on yourself so that more people will pay attention to you. The bigger and louder you get, the less likely that Hashem has any interest in interacting with you. We know this is true when it comes to Torah. We saw this already, that Hashem chooses to give the Torah on Har Sinai, as opposed to all of these other mountains that are so busy trying to attract his attention. Har Sinai was not the greatest, not in physical stature or in its, it wasn't so lush, it wasn't so inviting, but Hashem chose it. And we, of course, we know from that midrash that we're often taught when we're very young, that this is one of the things that is so fundamental to receiving Torah, is that a person has to be humble. We saw this at the Talmid Chacham as well, as we saw earlier in the Psukim, with this phrase of Im tishkevun bein shvatayim, that the Talmid Chacham, the one who wants to grow in Torah and become a Torah scholar, needs or will benefit from laying amongst the pots and pans, getting involved in the nitty gritty, right? Like not just those big, exciting questions of life or death, or, you know, these super controversial issues that come up that take everyone's attention. No, he also is busy with the pots and the pans, the stuff that's maybe not so exciting, but is what we know living a Torah life is made up of those small details that are not so glamorous, right? It's not so exciting to call the rabbi and ask him about what to do when you accidentally, you know, you found this spoon in the pot with the chicken soup, but you're pretty sure that's your dairy spoon and you don't know how it got there, and you, right? That's like not so exciting. I don't want to say we all want exciting questions, because unfortunately exciting questions, you know, dramatic questions tend to come at difficult times, but you know, this is not a earth-shattering question. But that's what Limud HaTorah, that's what growth in Torah, that's what being a Talmid Chacham is all about, right? It's about those nitty gritty. It's about those small ideas. And here we find the idea repeated that Hashem chooses the mountain that is the least interested in drawing attention to itself, not the one that's out there dancing. That's where he wants the greatest moment of revelation to take place, on the mountain that is humble, on the mountain that is not trying to draw attention to itself. I couldn't help but notice the imagery that was created when you have mountains dancing. Like I was just trying to picture, and they're the Harim Gavnunim. They're very big. So you don't picture them being particularly good dancers either. They're just kinds of like, you know, moving themselves around. There's no rhythm. It's not impressive. They're just trying to draw as much attention to themselves as possible. And without making any political statements, because that would be the last thing I would want to do when we're studying Torah, I think there is a certain imagery of political leaders on both sides who try to put themselves in the spotlight as much as possible. So they'll do anything to get attention. They'll dance, they'll jump up and down, right? They'll flashing lights, like you name it, whatever they can do to get your attention. And of course, the tempting thing is to be taken in, of course, by those people who put on the best show. And really what we are hopefully able to focus on is the idea that the ones who are calling for attention, the ones who are saying, pick me, pick me, pick me, those are not the ones we want. We really want the leaders whom we have to almost beg to take leadership positions, right? Those very often are the most qualified people, not just because of their innate ability, but perhaps because of their humility, because they have to be asked. I'm studying Sefer Vayikra with one of the classes in Hebrew Academy. We just actually finished the story, the very tragic death of Nadav and Avihu. Right before that, during the dedication of the Mishkan, this is Aaron HaKohen's greatest day of his life, which we know becomes marred by tragedy. But before that happens, he has been watching and listening to Moshe for a full week. For 7 complete days, Moshe is dressing him and giving him instructions and telling him what to do. Finally, day 8, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, it's showtime. This is the day that Aaron has to show up, and he's got to put all of these things into practice. It's his finest and greatest moment. And we see something in, I believe it's in Perek Tet, I don't remember the exact, I think Pasuk Zion, where Moshe has to say to Aaron, you need to come close to the Mizbeach, and you need to get started, right? The implication is that Aaron wasn't jumping at the chance to start to be the master of ceremonies that day. He was sort of hanging out in the backgrounds with the pots and pans, so to speak. And it requires Moshe giving him a special invitation. No, this is really your time, Aaron. It's time. Come on, we need you. And Rashi comments there that Aaron had some kind of shame, perhaps related to his connection to the Chet HaEgel. He was embarrassed, he felt uncomfortable, and Moshe says something so powerful to him. Lekach nivcharta. This is what you were chosen for, right? This is why Hashem created you. This is why you were, it's showtime. This is all about you. This is why you were put on this earth. And it's sort of, that's the kinds of encouragement that we would hope our leaders would need, right? That they're not jumping into the limelight. They're not jumping into taking charge and being responsible. They recognize how serious, how substantial all of their decisions are. They go into it with a sense of humility, that they have to be beckoned almost. They have to be asked to come and to be told, you were chosen for this. So I think those are three examples where we see in the parak of Tehilim the idea of the significance of humility, that Hashem models humility for us, that he wants humility from us. And David HaMelech seems to be suggesting that it is through that humility that a person will be able to access actually the greatest reward. So that while you might think it's the person who dances the most or sings the loudest or gets the biggest awards or has the most followers, it might look like those are the people that are going to have the greatest benefit. But at the end of the day, it is specifically the people who are more inwardly focused, the ones who are focused on their homes, the ones who are focused on the pots and pans. Those are the ones that will have the greatest success in their interpersonal relationships, in their study of Torah, and in their leadership. And I think in those three ways, we see this request for humility. In the time that we have left, I want to focus on this one pasuk that started me on Parak Samachet in the first place. And that is here, pasuk Chaf. Baruch Hashem yom yom ya'amos lanu ha'el yeshuasenu salah. Baruch Hashem, right? Blessed is Hashem, yom yom, every single day. Even in that phrase, yom yom, you sort of hear the like humdrum, right? Yom yom, day by day. Says David HaMelech, we should bless Hashem every single day. Why? Ya'amos lanu, because he will ya'amos. Now the word ya'amos is related or comes from the shoresh of amas or amusim. Amusim are piles, bundles, heaps. And the most, I think, basic way to understand this pasuk is bless Hashem, thank Hashem every single day, because every single day he gives you your pile of what you need for that day. Ya'amos lanu, he's going to provide for you. He's going to support for you, is actually, I think, how Rav Hirsch explains it. He's going to provide for you what you need on that particular day. This, you can all imagine why this became a bit of a mantra for me over the last 9-10 months, where the idea that I don't know how I'm getting toilet paper for my family tomorrow. Like, we have enough toilet paper today, but I'm worried, are we going to have enough toilet paper next week or next month? Or where am I going to get enough eggs from? I remember that being the wait right before Pesach, right? Of where are the eggs coming from? Where am I going to get them? I have enough eggs in my house today, but I'm worried about how I'm going to have enough eggs next week. And this pasuk tells us that it is my job today to give thanks to Hashem for what I have today. And to know when this becomes a mantra, you begin to train yourself that I can be grateful for what I have today. And then when I need it, I'll be grateful to Hashem the following day or the day after, because I'm also going to get what I need. Ya'amos lanu, he's going to make sure that I have what I need. He'll give me in bundles, in heaps, in piles, whatever it is that I need. I heard from Mrs. Dina Schoonmaker, who is a teacher in the Chala, which is not the seminary I went to, but is the seminary my daughter went to. I was listening to a class that she gave, and she pointed out that this is not just true about physical stuff, although it's a really great lesson during a pandemic to take in, that we just have to be grateful that what we have today is what we need. And when I need the next thing, I'm going to get it, because that's the way this works. Hashem takes care of my daily needs. But Mrs. Schoonmaker explained that this doesn't just have to do with physical, with supplies or with material needs, that this also has to do with our innate ability, our talents, our skills, our coping mechanisms. I may not be the only person who thinks this, but when I think about what's going to be tomorrow or next week or next month or next year, and how am I going to handle the situation when? How am I going to get through this upcoming, complicated situation that's going to happen? How am I going to get through this difficult time? It's not happening right now, but it's going to happen eventually. So how am I going to deal with it? So Mrs. Schoonmaker says, in the same way that Hashem makes sure that you have the milk and the eggs and the toilet paper that you need on a daily basis, he also makes sure that when time comes on the yom that you have a challenge, on the yom that you have something you have to get through, you will have the support you need, you will have the skills you need to make it through that day. And I really find this to be very, very meaningful, because very often when I anticipate something, which, let's all be honest, it is the anticipation of what is to come that is the source of all of our anxiety. If I can just focus on the here and now, on the yom, then my anxiety is much less, because right now I'm breathing, thank God. And right now, okay, the sun isn't shining, but the Wi-Fi is working. And right now the heat is on and the electricity is on. And right now I'm dressed and I'm clean and I have food to eat. Right now I have all my needs. It's when I start to think about what happens after this yom and I let my mind wander to the yoms to come that the anxiety sets in. So this pasuk, this mantra of Baruch Hashem Yom Yom Ya'amos Lanu, every day he provides for us, he gives us what we need, is so grounding and so powerful. And I have really tried so hard to say it to myself when, you start to get a little crazy in your head about worrying what's going to come. And hearing Mrs. Schoonmaker say that it's not just a mantra for calming ourselves down about the physical needs that we have, but also about our emotional, our concerns about how we're going to handle things in the future. That when I get there, Hashem will give me what I need to get through it. I think very often we look back and we say, oh my gosh, how did I get through it? I don't know, but I did. Look at what we did for the last 10 months. Look, you look back, if you were to look forward at 10 months like this, nah, I'm not able to do it. But in the moment, we will have what we need to get through the day. Baruch Hashem, Yom Yom Ya'amos Lanu. Hashem, as we face each and every challenge, each and every day, Hashem will give us what we need. One last point on this idea, which is from Rav Hirsch, who I'm happy to end this year with, since today is his Yoetzet. Rav Hirsch reads the pasuk. I mean, it's so brilliant. I don't know why I didn't notice it, or anyone else for that matter. Listen to how he reads this pasuk. Baruch Hashem, blessed is Hashem. Yom Yom Ya'amos Lanu. Every single day, Ya'amos, he's going to pile stuff up for us. And he doesn't mean this in a bracha way or in a supply or skills way. No, he means he's going to throw stuff on top of us. He's going to pile and burden and throw some more. And in fact, he brings a proof for his idea from the psukim and chumash that talk about when a person piles up their donkey. This is the word that's used. It refers to burden. It's not just a pile or a heap on the ground. It's a burden. It's something heavy. It's something that's so hard to carry. Every single day, Hashem will give us burdens. And every single day, Ha'el Yeshuatenu Selah. He is the same God who gives you the burdens, is the same God who saves you every single day. I just found that to be mind-blowing, sort of this framework for looking at the things that we are challenged to deal with on a daily basis. It's a reminder of the source of those frustrations, the source of our burdens. We've talked about how the source of our blessings as well. It all comes from Hashem. And because it comes from him, he is the one that is going to be the one to save us. One of the many things we know that is so unique, as we've seen in this parak of Tehilim, that is so just reassuring and reaffirming, is the fact that Hashem is capable of doing anything. I know in our family, we were talking in the days leading up to Rabbi Kalamer's death, which was on Friday, and we just kept saying, like, we can ask God for miracles. We knew the situation was terrible. We knew he was very ill, but that's okay, right? We don't give up. We were sad. We were devastated, but that doesn't mean I can't ask for a miracle. Hashem is capable of doing anything. And this parak of Tehilim, David HaMelech, goes to great lengths to describe that he is the greatest warrior. He can destroy the greatest armies. He can protect his people from anything, even when the odds are stacked against us. And that same God is the one who doesn't just take care of the world, but he takes care of us as individuals. He is our model for strength plus humility. He is there for the most vulnerable, and he's encouraging us to do the same. He's mandating that we do the same. As big and strong as we think we might be, right? We know that we're just all the same human beings, and we've all been handed different decks, different hands, and our job is to look out for each other, to recognize that the vulnerable, those people who are lacking, that they need support, and we can be there for them in that way. And that when it comes to our Torah study, we very, very much want to be humble in that respect as well. We want to recognize that it is the daily victories, the day-to-day, the things that go on in the privacy and the quiet of our own homes, where we might be tempted to think that it's not so important because it's not showing up on the evening news, but to recognize that those things, those humble, small moments, are actually where the greatness is. And then finally, the idea that in our leaders, we want this type of humility. We want the people who have to be encouraged and cajoled, not the ones who are dancing and trying to get the most attention. We want to see that kind of humility in our leaders. And then, of course, we want to see it in ourselves. This idea, one more, just like a callback to this mantra of Baruch Hashem Yom Yom Ya'amos Lanu Ha'al Yeshuatinu Sela, that Hashem should, and we should see that this is what he is doing for us, that he is the source of all of our blessings. He will make sure we have all that we need on a daily basis. We don't need to worry about tomorrow because he will take care of us every single day, Yom Yom. And to remember that when we do have those challenges, because it seems David HaMelech is telling us we will have our challenges daily, to remember that the same one who gave us the challenges will be the same one who will save us from them as well. So on that note, for those of you who are familiar with Rabbi Kellemer, I hope, without me overstating it, you saw how his humility, which was really, like, I think his greatest attribute, to be literally head and shoulders above every Torah scholar, all of them, and to have the humility to spend time to give candy to the children that he would pass on the street, to literally remember every person he ever met and all of their family. The humility that was the way that he lived his daily life. It is a charge to all of us to just try, and none of us have reasons to feel, so not humble. But he is just a reminder that a person who was given such tremendous gifts, such tremendous talents, such a mind to focus on our capacity for enjoying the day-to-day and to relating to each other with humility and with respect, of course, always with respect. And with that, I bid you all a happy Monday. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think Shira was going to share some upcoming programs with everyone.